Hi and welcome to this month's Conan Fitness Platinum webinar. We're looking at training and metabolism, a very popular topic. Metabolism is, and even one of a bit of controversy. So we're going to look at it tonight in these topics. Firstly, the importance of metabolism. We'll give you a really good idea of how much of your total daily energy expenditure comes from metabolism, just to put it in perspective, the factors affecting it, and which of those factors are in our control, and therefore where we should probably put our attention in our training to get maximum benefit from increasing our metabolism or doing what we want with it to get our goals. So first of all, to get an idea of the importance of metabolism, because we hear it a lot, this is a list of some common activities or things we do for exercise and even rest and sleeping is shown in there. And what we're shown here is some energy costs of these activities. So on the right hand column you'll see where it says calories per hour. Now this is relevant to, if you look at the bottom, calories per hour for a typical 75 kilo person, this particular study. So we're looking at things like sleeping, and I've got rest in bold there. If you want to just make note of that caloric expenditure per hour, rest for a 75 kilo person is roughly about 94 calories per hour. So just remember that. Then we've got things like walking at different paces. Obviously, the faster you walk, the more calories it's going to burn per hour. And then same thing with running. The faster you run, it's more caloric expenditure per hour. And again, we've got a figure there in bold. It's just pick the middle of the range there, 11.29 k's per hour, around about 891 calories per hour. Just keep that figure in mind, because I'm going to compare resting with running at that pace very shortly, just to get an idea of the importance of metabolism and some other activities. So keep those figures in mind and have a look at this little equation. So when people talk about increasing their daily caloric expenditure, for instance, they might want to lose weight or burn fat or something like that, they say, I need to burn more calories than I'm consuming. Or if someone's trying to just maintain weight, they'll burn the same amount of calories that they're consuming. Then let's compare running for an hour. And if you remember the figure that was there, if someone was running, a 75 kilo person was running for an hour, it was about 891 calories per hour. And if they're doing that for 1 hour, let's say they did this in a day for an hour, it would be multiplied by 1 hour, which would be 891 calories. So 891 calories per hour for 1 hour is 891 total. Now, if we compare that to resting, so let's compare a person who says, well, the vast majority of my caloric expenditure comes from my exercise, and I exercise a day by running, for instance, or whatever you do. It might be weight training or whatever. This is just a nice, easy example. And they say most of my energy expenditure comes from my training. Well, this will show you how that's very much misleading, where our resting metabolism has much more of a factor than that. While we do want to do exercise to increase our energy expenditure, this is how far the difference is. If we were to measure that figure, if you remember, it was 94.2 calories per hour. Now that's much less than running. Obviously, being at rest, less calories per hour, that's no brain surgery right there. But because there's so many more hours in the day, for someone who just rested for the whole day, 24 hours in the day, they're going to burn, much, much more calories just from your body ticking over. That's called the basal metabolic rate, just your normal metabolism for every cell in your body needs to survive and live. And even though it's only chewing up small amounts of calories per hour, because it's so many hours in the day, it adds up to much, much more. So if we're trying to affect one of these, which one would you like to affect the most? If you were to increase one of those by, say, 5 or 10%, which one would you like to improve by 5 or 10%? And I think the answer there is pretty clear. It's the metabolism. So what are the factors affecting basal metabolism? Things like age, sex, and a lot of these things we can't affect. Weight and height, you can't affect height. We can affect weight. Things like fitness, exercise, they're things that we can affect. Diet, we can affect. Certain things we don't have control over, like genetics, obviously. But the one I want to look at today that we do have some degree of influence over is lean body mass. And the reason I've got that one highlighted is it's one of the areas where we can put our attention, and it's one where we can really have an effect on metabolism long term, as lean body mass is one of the best predictors of basal metabolic rate. So let's have a look at that in more detail. Here's the metabolic rates of different tissues, keeping in mind that this is at rest. So things like the kidney, the heart, and the brain, these things are metabolic furnaces if we're talking pound for pound. So where it says metabolic rate, this is the amount of calories they burn per kilogram per day. So take, for instance, kidneys. Each gram, pound for pound, kidneys are just an absolute metabolic machine because they're just pumping out work every second of the day. But we do need to keep in mind that kidneys, we've got two of them, and together they don't even weigh 1 kilo. They're much, much less. So while it says 400, almost 440 calories per kilogram per day, it would be much less than 440 calories per day because there's much less than 1 kilo. Whereas if you go down the list there and look at muscle, and you hear people say, oh, muscle burns so many calories because muscle is such a metabolically active tissue. Well, you can see there that it's clearly nothing compared to kidneys, heart, brain, and even liver. However, there's so much more of it. So if you were to think about the brain, the heart, the kidneys, the liver, there's not much there by weight. The heaviest of those would be probably the liver, and certainly nothing compared to muscle. A typical person might have 40, 45, even 50 kilos of muscle. So when we're talking 15 calories per kilogram per day, we're talking 500, 600, for some people 700 calories per day. That's significant, and we're talking at rest. This study. So then if we were to be doing activity or exercise on top of that, the muscles would obviously burn and consume a lot more than that. So when we're talking about lean body mass, so that's fat-free mass is kind of everything or anything except fat, and lean body mass, the main thing there we're talking is muscle. If we're able to increase that, we can significantly make a decent jump on our caloric expenditure daily, and that's what we're talking about, our basal metabolism, and this is even at rest. Now let's compare fat versus muscle, because you hear a lot of people say, hey, I lost 2 kilos this week, I lost 3 kilos this week, I lost half a kilo this week, whatever. How do we know what we're losing? Well, this is one of the things we need to be conscious of. In 1 kilogram of fat, there's around about 7,700 calories. So if you think of a kilo of fat, we know that fat is a storehouse for energy. That's what it is. It's just stored energy. And there's around about 7,700 calories worth of energy in a kilo of fat. So that means if you were to lose, when we say we want to burn more than we consume to lose weight, if we were to have a caloric deficit of 1,100 calories per day, so if you know what I mean by that, 1,100 calories less consumed than burned, so a caloric deficit of 1,100 calories per day, it would be a kilogram per week. And these are rough numbers, a kilogram per week. Now that's not easy to do, to burn 1,100 calories more than you consume. Certainly possible, very easily possible. Most people don't do that. Now if we compare that to muscle has less, muscle isn't just a storehouse for energy. It does have energy in it, but it's got much less, only 1,320 calories per kilogram for muscle. And in certain circumstances the body will break down or can break down protein or the amino acids from muscle to use as an energy source if it needs to, which means if we were to do the same thing, if we lost 1,100 calories per day, or a caloric deficit of for 7 days, that's 7,700 calories in a week, would that be a kilo? So if someone says, look, I've achieved a caloric deficit of 1,100 calories per day for the whole week, 7 days in the week, that means I've got a caloric deficit for the week of 7,700 calories. That should mean I lost a kilo. The answer is that if you lost that much calories from fat, as in it all came from fat, then the answer would be yes. But if you had a caloric deficit of 7,700 and that energy came from breaking down muscle, that would be 5.8 kilograms, which is a massive difference. And someone says, hey, I lost 5.8 kilos this week. The answer is, well, that could have just come from muscle. Not to say that it all would have been, or that it all would have been fat, but we just want to be conscious that when we're losing fat, it's certainly not usually at a hugely fast rate, because If we're losing fat, it's obviously slower than muscle because there's more energy in it, and we want to be smart about how we do that. So what things to do with training can we influence and get the most out of our metabolism, the most out of burning fat rather than muscle? And one of the things I want to promote in this webinar is the benefits of anaerobic training and weight training. And that certainly doesn't mean we're dissuading aerobic, because I could sit here all day talking about the benefits of aerobic training, and we do that. In fact, we always say get an aerobic base first. But it's to say that there are, instead of only doing aerobic training, only doing distance events, for instance, there's a lot of benefits to throwing in some anaerobic, and there's a lot of benefits to having some weight training somewhere in your weekly routine. And here's some of the acute benefits. So acute effects, meaning straight away you'll get this. Anaerobic intensity, a lot of people say that it's only working anaerobic. When you do an anaerobic bout, anaerobic means, that the level of effort or intensity above which oxygen, lower intensities, oxygen can be used to provide the energy you need. But once the intensity starts to creep up, the rate which oxygen can be used to break down energy sources is too slow. So it has to go to another source of energy, which is a quicker source of energy, and that's the anaerobic energy systems. And when we do anaerobic bouts or intensities that are in anaerobic energy systems, we have an aerobic recovery. So if you can imagine a weight set, like you're doing a resistance exercise, and it's typically anaerobic. When you put that weight down and you recover between the next set, the recovery is mostly aerobic. If you were to do a 100-meter sprint, vast majority of that, 99% of that is anaerobic. But as soon as you stop, you need to recover from that bout of exercise, and most of that's aerobic. So you get you get benefits from both just from doing the anaerobic training. The second thing is what we call EPOC, or excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. Sounds a little bit wanky, but it just means the amount of oxygen consumed post-exercise. So as soon as your exercise stops, the post-exercise oxygen consumption tells us how much above normal basal level of metabolism your body is still in, even though you've ceased exercise. So if your basal level of metabolism is, X amount, you start to train, and it obviously goes up because you're burning more calories and burning and consuming more oxygen. And as soon as you stop training, it doesn't go straight back to baseline. It doesn't go straight back to baseline. It takes a little bit of while to creep back down, and that the area under that curve post-exercise, what we call EPOC. And they say, and obviously the higher and more pronounced that is, and for the longer and more pronounced it is, it means we're burning excess calories even though we've ceased training. And we get benefits even up to 15 hours later. So you've stopped training, you're still burning more calories than usual up to 15 hours later. And this is mostly related to the intensity. So at a very low intensity of exercise, there's not that much EPOC. But the higher the intensity, the more anaerobic and the more shock to the body, if you will, and particularly with anaerobic and weight training, we have a slightly higher EPOC. Thirdly, there's just muscle recovery. So if we are training to an intensity where the body needs to recover, there's BMR is basal metabolic rate. There's increases to basal metabolic rate up to 3 days, 72 hours after. So that still comes under acute benefits. And increased glucose metabolism. So really good for people with diabetes, or those that have got a bit of insulin resistance knocking on diabetes' door. Chronic, so long-term, really simply, more muscle is more lean body mass, which means more basal metabolic rate, as we had shown earlier. This isn't to dissuade aerobic from anaerobic, because we want the aerobic base. It's just to say that, a little funny example to say, what do you want to look like? If you only do aerobic, this is obviously extreme examples. Same for the female version. And I think there might be some performance-enhancing drugs on the right-hand side there, but I think we all get the point. So what about exercises? Compounds versus isolation. Compound exercises are the ones that have multi-joints involved in multiple muscle groups. So if you can imagine something like a bicep curl, there's movement just around the elbow joint, so that's one joint, and typically one main muscle group, which is the biceps or the muscles of the upper brachial plexus. But if we're talking about some sort of pushing or pressing or pulling movements, there's many joints involved and many muscle groups, and that's what we call compounds. And generally the compound exercises are better for metabolism for these reasons. They have higher energy expenditure because more intensity, or a bigger exercise has more intensity to it, which means less efficiency. And remember, from the perspective of burning calories, less efficiency is better. From the perspective of performance, higher efficiency is better. It's important to keep that in mind. More muscle growth typically from compounds, and a bigger EPOC, as we mentioned before, the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And that means the residual energy expenditure, the amount of calories burned after the training, the residual amount, is generally higher on compound exercises because more muscles are being used and more muscles are getting, it says damage, like that micro damage that happens to a muscle that just needs to recover from. So these are just some examples of the compound exercises. That's certainly not an exhaustive list, but just the main pushes and pulls, presses, etc. So that's it for this month, folks. Hope you got a lot from our training and metabolism and knowing what to put your focus on, how important metabolism is. Throw some weight training or some sort of anaerobic training into your routine if you haven't already done so, because we couldn't promote it highly enough. And until next month, train hard, play smart, and bring out the warrior within. Thanks.